On day 1, Steve spawns into the world and looks around. He appears to be in a plains biome. He walks straight over to a tree and punches it. Once the tree has been deleted, he makes a crafting table and then crafts some tools. Steve slays some nearby sheep that he sees, then grabs some flowers of colour and makes a bed and a furnace. Night is rapidly approaching, so Steve grabs some dirt from the ground, builds a dirt hut around his house and then sleeps. On day 2, Steve takes his crafting table, his furnace and his bed and sets off in a random direction to explore. He comes across a ravine and thinks about going down into it, but then decides against it. He keeps walking until he sees a mountain and spots some iron ore. He pickaxes the iron ore vein and then smelts it down and gets his first pieces of armour as well as some tools. He keeps wandering around the mountain until he spots a stray who starts shooting at him and rapidly depleting his health, so he has no choice but to slay it with his sword. He then receives its dropped bow as a reward. Then Steve spots a couple of cows roaming the field. He has steak for dinner that night. Steve continues exploring and sleeping over the next few days. Then, on day 7, he discovers a village. He trades with the villagers some of the resources he has collected in exchange for emeralds. Steve decides to live in a clearing next to the village and spends the next few days constructing his humble abode. It was at this point that Steve realised he wasn't such a great builder, but at least it had 4 walls and a roof. Inside, Steve places his bed, crafting table and a chest, which he stores all of his valuables in. From days 11 to 14, Steve spends his time planting crops and trying to find diamonds. He finds lots of ores like copper, coal and even emeralds, but still no diamonds. On day 15, with the village farmer, Steve trades some of the wheat that he grew for emeralds. He then has enough emeralds to buy a Fortune 3 enchanted diamond pickaxe off the local blacksmith, which greatly speeds up his mining process. Finally, on day 20, Steve hits the jackpot and finds a huge vein of diamonds, which he happily takes home, and then makes a full set of diamond armour plus a sword. Steve spends the next 10 days sprucing up his house a bit and planting and selling more crops. He even takes a brewing stand from the local village and prepares to make some potions. On day 31, Steve decides to go to the Nether. He goes down into his mine and then mines some obsidian from a pool of lava. He then prepares as much as he can by making sure he has plenty of food, and he crafts a shield and puts on a gold chest plate to keep the piglins at bay. On day 35, he decides he is ready to enter the portal and jumps in. He immediately looks around and discovers he has spawned in a nether fortress with dangerous wither skeletons, who instantly rush straight towards them, so he stabs them with his sword and one drops a head. He then starts getting shot at by blazers, who get him down to half a heart before he kills them and gets some blaze rods. Steve then recovers in a little hole for a while. He continues exploring around until he spots a piglin bastion across a lava lake. He builds a bridge across the lava lake towards the bastion, then grabs some nether wart from outside of it, but is too scared to enter. Unfortunately, one of the piglin brutes spots him, so he runs straight back to the portal and calls it a day. When Steve steps out of the portal at home, it is the night of day 39. On day 40, Steve decides it is time to upgrade his armour again. He goes down mining to get obsidian, lapis lazuli, and diamonds, and then he crafts an enchanting table. He then trades with the local librarian to get some enchanted books. He then begins enchanting his armour with things like protection, mending, and thorns. On days 41 and 42, he makes an auto wool farm to craft lots of beds, and on day 43, Steve chops many trees. He continues trading wheat for emeralds and buying enchanted books until day 50, where he decides it is time to go back into the Nether. He brews a powerful fire resistance potion, then equips a gold chestplate and a shield, then dives back into the Nether. Once in the Nether, Steve immediately digs down to around block level 15, and then with an inventory full of beds, starts mining for netherite, When you try and sleep in the nether, beds explode, and since ancient debris is indestructible, this is the best way of finding it. He does this until his inventory is empty of beds, where he ends up with 20 pieces of ancient debris, enough for a full set of armour and one tool. Steve heads back up to the main level of the nether, where he prepares to get the netherite upgrade template. At the Bastion, Steve cautiously approaches the first chest and finds exactly what he's looking for, the upgrade template. He turns around and exits the Bastion, but as he's doing so a piglin brute spots him and begins to chase him. Steve breaks into a mad dash to the portal, with the piglin brute hot in pursuit, though as he's crossing the lava bridge, Steve has an idea. He breaks one block of the bridge so the piglin brute is stopped right in his tracks. Steve then heads home. By the time he steps out of the portal, it's the morning of day 57. Steve then puts all of his nether loot in a chest and then goes mining for diamonds. After finding around 40 diamonds, Steve emerges from the mines on day 60. Using the diamonds, he duplicates the upgrade templates, and then heading over to the smithing table, he upgrades all of his gear to netherite. On day 61, Steve is just minding his own business in his yard and looking mighty fine in his new armour, when a patrol passes through. He shoots all the pillagers and kills the captain, which gives him the bad omen effect, and then the next day, when he goes to trade at the village, it triggers a raid. Steve quickly runs home and grabs his bow, and then runs back and stands on top of the villagers' houses and shoots every wave of pillagers and vindicators that come. After completing the raid, Steve is the hero of the village and has lots of totems of undying to show for it. On day 63, Steve wants to acquire the last enchantment he needs, Swift Sneak, which can only be found in an ancient city. So he heads over to the nearest mountain and goes down with some torches into a cave. He spends a few days searching the caves, surviving on stacks and stacks of bread. On day 66 he finds a skeleton spawner, where he fights a few skeletons and gets a music disc. The next day he finally stumbles upon it, the ancient city, located down in the deepest, darkest depths of the world. He crouches and moves straight into the city, but when he places a torch, it alerts a shrieker. He spots a chest and opens it, hoping to find Swift Sneak, but all it does is alert the shrieker again. Luckily, he gets a golden apple from the chest. He continues on, being as careful as possible, when he accidentally stands, alerting the shrieker for the third time. He is scared out of his mind this point, but he doesn't want to give up, so he spots another chest and goes over and carefully opens it, and feasts his eyes upon the Holy Grail, a Swift Sneak 3 enchanted book. At that moment though, everything goes dark, and Steve hears a ferocious rumbling as the warden burrows out of the ground. Steve very cautiously backs away towards where he came from and evades the warden. He pickaxes his way back towards the surface and emerges on the other side of the mountain on the night of day 70. From there, it takes him a whole entire day to get back home. Steve decides that it is soon time to fight the Ender Dragon. He finds some pumpkin seeds and plants them. He also builds a chicken coop and starts farming chickens so he can get lots of feathers to make arrows. He then heads back to the nether for more blaze rods and to kill some endermen. On day 80, Steve decides that he is finally ready to fight the Ender Dragon, so he crafts lots of Eyes of Ender and sets out to find the stronghold, which he actually ends up finding under another village on day 83. He digs down until he breaks into the stronghold, and then Steve runs around until he finds the portal room. He places a carved pumpkin on his head and then puts all 12 Eyes of Ender in and gets ready to jump into the portal. He takes a deep breath and leaps in. This is it. Steve spawns on an obsidian platform in the end and then goes to fight the Ender Dragon, which is flying around. He carefully shoots all of the end crystals and then goes and stands in the centre of the end and hits the dragon every time it perches. After what feels like hours, the dragon comes down for a final swoop and Steve hits it with his netherite sword and frees the end. He gleefully grabs the dragon egg and jumps back into the portal and spawns in at home on day 90. Steve proudly displays the dragon egg on a pedestal, then runs back to the stronghold and goes straight into the end again to get a pair of elytra. He throws an ender pearl through an end gateway and lands right in front of the dreaded End City, which he carefully ascends all the way to the top, killing shulkers as he goes. Right as he nears the top, Steve slips and falls off and plummets all the way to the ground. And with a loud bang, his totem of undying goes off and saves his life. Steve incredibly carefully now retraces his steps all the way back up to the top of the End City. He finally makes it to the End ship, slays the last Shulker, and grabs the highly coveted Elytra. He equips the Elytra, glides back down to the End gateway, throws an Ender Pearl into it, and then goes through the portal back home. It is now day 92, and Steve decides the very final thing to do is slay the Wither. So he heads back into the Nether one final time to kill some skeletons and get their heads, and to grab some soul sand. He is debating how exactly to kill the Wither when he remembers the ancient city. So he heads all the way back down to the ancient city and places the soul sand and the 3 Wither heads, which makes enough noise to spawn the dreaded Warden. Steve backs away and watches the fierce fight ensue between the Warden and the Wither. The Wither just flies around shooting the Warden, whilst the Warden uses a supersonic attack against the Wither. Finally, the Warden defeats the Wither and is left standing on just a few hearts, so Steve shoots it with his bow and it topples over. Steve then quickly swoops in and retrieves the highly valuable Wither Star. On the morning of day 99, Steve arrives back home, and using emeralds that he has traded with and stockpiled over the last 100 days, Steve constructs a beacon. Finally, on day number 100, Steve makes a monument to himself. That was 100 days in LEGO Minecraft. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have a Merry Christmas and see you next week.